So here we have this post by Cointelegraph. Bitcoin long-term holders have realized more profit this cycle than any cycle since 2016, 2017. So you can see here, more profit has been taken than this previous cycle and less than this one here. And this is in Bitcoin terms. 3.27 million Bitcoin have been sold by long-term holders, whatever that is defined by in this here. I think a lot of people seeing this chart might be really alarmed by it because these are cycle tops, right? This is a cycle top here. When there's the most sold, there's a cycle top here, cycle top here, cycle top here. So this is sort of pointing at the idea of there being a cycle top right now because of all the long-term sellers selling into the market. Now, that is possible. That is one possibility. The other possibility that I like to look at here is that this is just marginally higher than this last cycle. We could still see a lot more sellers into the market that would continue to push the price up higher. I do see a correction happening on the horizon, but at what scale? And one other thing that I want to talk about here is another chart by Glassnode called the realized cap for Bitcoin. I think this is really important to show how much value is being put into Bitcoin. If they bought Bitcoin, say back here when it was $1,000 in 2017, and they're selling it at $100,000, that is 100 times more value in dollar terms being put into the Bitcoin network. That is somebody that is now just at break even, that wants to see the price increase until they are ready to sell as well. And really what we're determining here is how many of these new buyers are going to hold for as long as the previous holders held for, right? Are they expecting 100x on their return? Are they going to hold until that happens? A lot of times with these markets, new buyers end up being short-term holders, but really that also is determined by how the market is acting. So they're short-term holders if they're buying at a top, because oftentimes they'll sell after the price dips significantly and meaningfully for those holders. However, a lot of them will hold through that, and they have added in that additional dollar term value into the Bitcoin network, and they expect the value to grow over time. This is a bit older. This is from February 23rd. I don't have access to this chart though, so I'm just going to use this one here. But this actually shows the realized cap. So on November 20th, Bitcoin's price first reached 96K. 3 months later, we are at the same price. But the difference is that the realized cap has increased from 700 billion to 860 billion. So this line here, this orange one, is the realized cap. Even though the price in this period stayed the same, the realized cap increased by 160 billion, a fair percentage, a 22% increase in new net money. This is $1.78 billion every single day. And this here is a definition of realized cap. So let's take a look at it. Since realized cap is the actual price paid for the Bitcoin in existence as opposed to current price as other assets use, what you are seeing happen is that as Bitcoin is sold and bought, the average price paid per Bitcoin is rising, meaning more people are agreeing the price is fair. This more realistically shows what people think Bitcoin should be valued at. And oftentimes this happens in a consolidation period, and Bitcoin can make a move from there. So if everybody's agreeing, if people are putting in new money, right? That's what this is showing here, is that new money is being added into the market. The realized cap is gaining because old sellers that have held from lower prices are selling to new buyers at higher prices. So it's not just about the selling that's happening, the sell side pressure, it's about the buy side pressure as well. All of these sales have buyers on the other end, and those buyers decide that 100 plus thousand per Bitcoin is worth it. And so they are adding in more new US dollars into the value, into the realized cap of Bitcoin. This doesn't necessarily only show that this is some sort of peak, right? And we don't know if this is peaking. This could go way higher. And we also don't have the metrics here. I don't know why. They're only showing from the lows to the highs. There would be long-term sellers throughout this as well, even if it collapsed and went all the way down. They're showing these durations here prior to an all-time high and a drawdown afterwards. They're showing a correlation between old holders, long-term holders selling and realizing some US dollar gains and a market top happening. The thing is this is always going to be a lagging metric, right? We don't know when the top is in. This looks like it could be a top, right? Because it is now higher than the previous cycle of long-term holders selling the amount of Bitcoin. Now, the thing is, though, again, price has stayed very stable this entire time comparatively. And that's because buyers are stepping in size because of the added availability and access to be able to buy Bitcoin, whether that's through instruments like MSTR or instruments like IBIT. They can now have access to acquire Bitcoin. So analysts here say that the sell side pressure signals a late market phase. So a late market phase is assuming that we are at the end stages of a cycle. We are late in the bull market, and the market's going to shift and be early in a bear market, right? So that we are late and we are in a late market phase. This is possible, but how long will they be wrong for until they are right? And I could see this going on a lot longer. I could see the buyers coming in a lot more. If you look at Bitcoin on the daily here, you can actually see that these daily dips are being bought up pretty significantly. The drawdowns are not like they were in the past. 24% drawdown, 25% drawdown. That was people going absolutely nuts, thinking everything was collapsing. If you look into the past of Bitcoin, those drops were just so commonplace, right? I mean, this is one day here. This is an 18% drop, 20% drop, and this isn't even anywhere close to being a bear market scenario for this. 25% drop there as well. Very normal, right? And all of this, you really start to have to zoom in and make this a lot bigger, because if you zoom out, this just all looks incredibly insignificant when it comes to where we are today with Bitcoin, right? All of this starts to look like a flat line compared to where we are today. But if you zoom in, these things start to look significant for the time that they were. And this is weekly now, so we can think about this massive drop here in 2018, right? 47%. There was no buying up the Bitcoin immediately. That was a massive quick drawdown in 2 weeks period. And now what we have, if we go to where we are today, this is our 3 week period here. This is even including the wicks, and we're 12% down in 3 weeks. So you can see a lot less downside volatility relative to the past of Bitcoin. Even though there's been a lot of long-term sellers coming into the market, there's also a lot of buy pressure keeping the price up. And this time, if you look at the charts, you can kind of see that this time looks significantly different. There's not the massive drawdowns. There's a stair-stepping upwards instead of a steep upwards and a steep down and steep up. It's just stair-stepping upwards. The only way that Bitcoin is consumed is by lost wallets. When somebody loses their Bitcoin, you could think of that Bitcoin as being lost. The rest of Bitcoin that doesn't get lost, it exists forever. And so that same Bitcoin that was mined and bought in 2015 is now the Bitcoin that is being sold and bought in 2025, 10 years later. It's the same Bitcoin. And so what happens here is just this recycling from long-term holders to short-term holders. Short-term holders become long-term holders, and they sell some of their Bitcoin to new short-term holders to upgrade their life, right? This is the cycle of the Bitcoin markets over time. And as the value of this goes up in comparison to everything else around it, the long-term sellers have to sell less to get the same amount of purchasing power as they had to in the past. So even though we've seen more long-term sellers sell more Bitcoin than the previous cycle, we've seen them acquire a lot more purchasing power from those sales. And we've seen a lot more of the numbers of long-term sellers selling a lot less comparatively because they don't need to sell as much because the Bitcoin is worth more. So as this changes hands, I actually see this a very positive thing. I see this very natural in the cycle. I see this as people selling. They can only sell that Bitcoin once, right? They can only sell that Bitcoin once to a new holder. That new holder is buying that Bitcoin, and they can decide if they want to become a long-term holder or not. And I think the community, the structure, the understanding of Bitcoin is increasing, and the idea of the holding for at least 4 years has become very popular. So personally, I'm not trying to time the markets. If I see big dips come along, I will continue to buy them. I just expect that Bitcoin will over time go up and to the right, and I don't care necessarily what happens to the dollar price in the short term. I do think this is interesting that there's been a lot of long-term holders, but I think that they are selling to new long-term holders, and that will provide value and purchasing power increase over time with Bitcoin. Now, if you want to get yourself some Bitcoin, I recommend checking out Bitcoin Well. They're a non-custodial exchange, and you get yourself some free Bitcoin for signing up using my link. You can also book, again, a session with me, one-on-one, we can go over anything that you want. There's a link for the Blockstream Jade, which is a great Bitcoin-only wallet for beginners and intermediates. And there's a 15% discount code for the Stamp Seed Kit, a 5% discount code for Start9's Bitcoin nodes. And thanks everyone for watching this episode of Bitcoin Not Crypto. We'll see you on the next one.